It was the early hours of June 5, 1944, when the stillness of the Normandy coast was shattered by the low hum of distant aircraft engines. Private Thomas Sullivan, a young American soldier of 22, lay on the cold sand, the coarse grains pressing against his uniform. His heart thudded not from the chill, but from the anticipation. Tomorrow at dawn, Operation Overlord would begin, the largest amphibious assault in history, and Thomas, like thousands of others, would storm the beaches of Nazi-occupied France. Thomas's mind wandered back to the letters he had received from home. His mother's words were filled with hope. His father's letters urged caution, and his younger sister, Emma, had drawn small, childish pictures of daisies and sunshine, oblivious to the horrors that her brother was about to face. Clutching a worn photograph of her, Thomas felt a lump rise in his throat. He knew that, tomorrow, nothing would be the same. Not for him, not for anyone. The night air was thick with tension. Soldiers whispered quietly in their ranks, their faces painted with camouflage, weapons ready. Thomas glanced at Sergeant Raymond Hayes, a veteran of North Africa, whose calm demeanor seemed almost unnatural in the face of the impending chaos. "Sleep while you can, kid," Hayes said in a low voice. "Once we hit Omaha Beach, it's all survival." Thomas nodded, trying to absorb the courage that radiated from the older man. But sleep eluded him. Outside, the Atlantic's waves lapped relentlessly against the shore, as if counting down to the moment when history would change forever. Suddenly, the darkness was pierced by the silhouettes of landing crafts cutting through the black waters. The soldiers lined up, their faces masks of determination and fear. Thomas felt a cold sweat trickle down his back as the ramps of the crafts were lowered. "Remember your training," Hayes whispered. "Stick together. Watch each other's six. Move fast. Hit hard." Thomas's grip tightened around his M1 Garand, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his young shoulders. As dawn broke, a pale light revealed the cliffs of Normandy and the labyrinth of German fortifications below. The bombardment had begun. Explosions rocked the coastline, throwing up clouds of sand and debris. Thomas's craft jolted as it struck a submerged obstacle, and men fell to the water around him. Screams pierced the air, some lost to the roar of artillery, others chillingly clear. Thomas swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus. He had trained for this, drilled for months on mock beaches, but nothing could prepare a man for the first glimpse of real combat. The ramp dropped. Thomas ran. Bullets tore through the air like angry hornets, ripping into the wooden planks around him. Men fell beside him, dragging others down with them. He dived behind a piece of wreckage, water and sand mixing on his uniform. His ears rang, his lungs burned. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to the small, trembling pulse in his chest and the desperate need to survive. Through the chaos, he saw a young German soldier freeze, fear mirrored in his eyes. Both men hesitated, momentarily united by the same human terror. Then a shout, a crack of gunfire, and the soldier collapsed. Thomas's stomach turned. He looked away, focusing on the next obstacle, the cliffside stairs leading to higher ground, where more soldiers waited, entrenched in fortified positions. Survival demanded movement, and hesitation was death. As he advanced, Thomas noticed Corporal Jameson, a friend from basic training, pinned behind a half-destroyed wall. "Cover me," Jameson yelled, and without thinking, Thomas fired at the German machine gun nest that had been suppressing their movement. The shots hit their mark. The gun fell silent. Jameson scrambled to Thomas's side. "You saved my life," he said breathlessly. Thomas nodded, too stunned to speak. Every second counted. Every life saved was a victory, but victory came at an unimaginable cost. Hours seemed like minutes. The beach became a blur of smoke, sand, and blood. Medics ran frantically, dragging the wounded to safer ground. Thomas moved forward with his unit, taking cover behind ruined obstacles, storming fortified positions, and facing the deafening roar of German artillery. It was a dance with death, every step a negotiation, every breath a borrowed one. Amid the fighting, Thomas spotted a small group of civilians huddled in the shadows of a ruined village. their faces pale and eyes wide with terror. They were not soldiers, yet they bore the same fear that gripped him. He wanted to help them, to offer comfort, but his orders were clear: secure the beachhead. There would be time later to mourn the innocent, if anyone survived. By late afternoon, Thomas and the surviving members of his unit had pushed further inland. The once pristine Normandy coastline was unrecognizable: smoldering craters, shattered obstacles, and the remnants of human life littered the sands. He sank to the ground, exhaustion threatening to pull him under. Yet, through the haze of pain and fatigue, he felt a spark of something extraordinary: resilience. Humanity, in its rawest form, refused to yield. The Allies had established a foothold, and the tide of war might yet turn. As darkness fell, Thomas wrote a quick note in his pocket journal, using a stub of pencil. June 6, 1944, Omaha Beach. I'm alive. I've seen horrors I cannot describe, yet hope flickers. We fight for more than survival. We fight for a future where letters and daisies are not reminders of loss, but promises of life. If I survive this, I will carry the faces of my comrades and the innocence of those we protect forever in my heart. The night was quiet now, but the silence was only temporary. Across Normandy, the war raged on, and Thomas knew that the days ahead would test him in ways he could not yet imagine. Yet, as he looked at the distant horizon, he clung to one certainty: they had arrived. The first wave of freedom crashing against the walls of tyranny. Some would not see the next day, but for those who survived, the story had only just begun. The dawn of June 7th broke with a pale gray sky, overcast and heavy with the scent of smoke and salt. Thomas Sullivan and the remaining men of his unit had survived the hell of Omaha Beach, but survival was only the first battle. Inland, the terrain grew treacherous. Dense hedgerows, narrow lanes, and shattered villages created a maze that German defenders used to deadly effect. Every step forward brought danger, every corner a potential ambush. Their orders were clear: advance toward the strategic town of St. Lo, a key hub that could open the road to the heart of Normandy. The soldiers moved cautiously, weapons at the ready, scanning every shadow. Each hedgerow seemed to whisper secrets of hidden gunmen, and the cries of distant artillery reminded them that the front lines were never far behind. Thomas's muscles ached, his uniform caked with dried blood and mud, yet he pressed on. He had learned that hesitation could be fatal. The first major resistance came at a small stone farmhouse, half collapsed and surrounded by fields of wheat now trampled by war. German troops had fortified the building, and a machine gun nest raked the advancing Americans with deadly precision. Sergeant Hayes motioned for cover. "We'll flank them," he whispered, eyes sharp, scanning the fields. Thomas felt his heart hammer. He had faced the machine guns on Omaha Beach, but this felt closer, more personal. The farmer's home, a place that should have symbolized life and warmth, was now a tomb of steel and fire. Thomas and two others crept through the undergrowth, crawling over the rough earth, bullets whizzing overhead. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. With a coordinated burst of fire, they suppressed the German soldiers long enough for Hayes to lead a frontal charge. Smoke, shouting, and chaos enveloped the farmhouse. When it was over, Thomas peered inside. Bodies lay scattered, lifeless, but the building was cleared. Relief washed over him, quickly replaced by guilt. Each victory demanded a human cost, and the weight of it pressed on his chest. As they continued, Thomas noticed the signs of war's toll on civilians. A small boy no older than 10 crouched beside a broken well, clutching a tattered doll. The child's eyes were wide with terror, a silent witness to the violence that had shattered his world. Thomas wanted to reach out to offer comfort, but Sergeant Hayes barked orders. The war could not pause for grief. The boy disappeared into the hedgerows as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Thomas with a knot of helplessness in his stomach. The march pressed on through the day, punctuated by firefights, artillery barrages, and the occasional lull, where only the wind and distant groans of the wounded filled the silence. They encountered German snipers hidden in trees and rooflines, and Thomas learned quickly to trust his instincts, moving from cover to cover, always watching, always calculating. The chaos was relentless, yet amidst it, Thomas discovered moments of quiet heroism. He and Corporal Jameson came across a trapped squad of fellow soldiers pinned behind a ruined barn. The Germans had them cornered, and the odds were against any rescue. Thomas took a deep breath and shouted a coordinated plan. Using a combination of smoke grenades and suppressing fire, they managed to extract the squad, carrying the wounded back to relative safety. Jameson clapped Thomas on the shoulder. "You're tougher than I thought, kid," he said. Thomas could only nod, too exhausted to speak. The image of the fallen soldiers seared into his mind. By evening, they reached a crossroad that had been the site of heavy fighting. Abandoned vehicles, burnt-out tanks, and scattered equipment littered the ground. The unit paused to regroup, tending to minor wounds and sharing scant rations. Thomas pulled out his small journal again, trying to capture the day's events before sleep claimed him. June 7, 1944, inland. The hedgerows hide death, yet courage finds a way. Men I've fought alongside are gone, yet others rise to take their place. Each step forward is paid in blood, but we move. We must. If Normandy is freed, it will be because we dared to walk through fire. Night fell, bringing a deceptive calm. The soldiers set up a makeshift camp, exhausted but alert. Thomas kept watch, listening to the distant echoes of artillery and the occasional rifle shot. Somewhere in the darkness, he could hear the whispers of the fallen, friends and foes alike, reminding him of the fragile line between life and death. It was during this quiet watch that Thomas reflected on his own transformation. The boy who had landed on Omaha Beach barely 24 hours earlier had become someone else entirely. Fear still lingered, but it was tempered by resolve. Survival was no longer enough. He had learned that courage meant facing the unimaginable again and again for the sake of others. As dawn approached, Thomas knew that the challenges ahead would be even greater. St. Lo was still miles away, heavily defended, and the German forces were regrouping for counterattacks. Every village, every hedge, every farm could conceal danger. Yet amidst the uncertainty, Thomas clung to the hope that each small victory, each life spared, was a step toward ending the nightmare of war. And so, with the first rays of sun filtering through the mist, Thomas Sullivan and his weary comrades pressed on, moving deeper into the heart of occupied France, unaware of the trials, betrayals, and heroics that awaited them in the days to come. June 8, 1944, dawned cold and gray. Thomas Sullivan's unit had pushed past the ruined crossroads and continued toward St. Lo. The countryside of Normandy was deceptively tranquil. Green fields and flowering hedgerows hid the horrors of war. Each hedgerow, tall and dense, became a natural fortress for German snipers and machine gunners. The narrow lanes snaked unpredictably, turning the simplest march into a dangerous puzzle. Every step forward required caution, yet the Americans knew hesitation would cost lives. Thomas moved alongside Corporal Jameson, their faces smeared with dirt and sweat. "This place is a maze," Jameson muttered. "One wrong turn, and it's a death trap." Thomas nodded, scanning the hedges, gripping his M1 Garand. Every rustle of leaves made his heart race. Unlike the open beaches here, the enemy could strike from any angle, and escape was rarely an option. The first major confrontation came at a stone farmhouse surrounded by a labyrinth of hedgerows. German troops had fortified the property, establishing machine gun nests and sniper positions in the trees. Sergeant Hayes gathered the men. "We'll split into 2 teams. Thomas, you're with me. Jameson, cover the left flank. Move carefully, watch for traps." The orders were clear, but the fear was palpable. Thomas and Hayes advanced, crawling through the damp undergrowth, dodging bullets that tore through the hedge around them. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the earthy scent of wet soil and crushed vegetation. They could hear cries from their comrades, some wounded, some trapped, and the screams reminded Thomas that this was no drill. Every moment, every breath was a gamble with death. As they approached the farmhouse, Thomas noticed a young German soldier, barely older than him, crouched behind a stone wall. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. fear mirrored in both faces, but duty demanded action. Thomas raised his rifle and fired. The soldier collapsed, and Thomas felt a mix of relief and guilt wash over him. War did not allow sentiment. Inside the farmhouse, chaos reigned. The Americans moved through shattered rooms, smoke and dust filling the air. German soldiers fought fiercely, using every inch of cover. Thomas ducked behind a ruined table, returning fire and throwing a grenade into a doorway, clearing the immediate threat. By the time the last shot echoed, the building was secured. Men tended to the wounded and counted the dead, their faces drawn and pale. Each casualty weighed heavily on Thomas. Survival came at a steep price. The farmhouse also revealed evidence of civilian life, scattered dishes, a child's toy soldier, a faded photograph of a family. Thomas paused, touching the photograph lightly. Here, too, the war had stolen innocence. In that moment, he realized that this conflict affected everyone: soldiers, civilians, friends, and foes alike. As they moved further inland, the Americans faced another deadly challenge: the infamous hedgerow ambushes. German forces had perfected guerrilla-style tactics, hiding in the dense foliage, firing from hidden positions, and disappearing before counterattacks could reach them. The unit advanced cautiously, scouts moving ahead to detect traps, while Thomas and Jameson provided cover. Bullets tore through branches, and the sound of gunfire echoed through the narrow corridors of greenery. During a brief lull, Thomas crouched beside a shallow ditch, catching his breath. He looked at Jameson, whose uniform was torn and face smeared with grime. "How much farther?" Thomas asked. Jameson shook his head. "St. Louis still miles away, and the closer we get, the tougher it'll be. Germans aren't going to make this easy." Thomas swallowed hard, knowing he was speaking the truth. Every step was a fight, every hedge a potential trap. That night, the unit camped in a small grove, exhausted but wary. They shared meager rations, and medics treated minor wounds. Around the campfire, Thomas wrote in his pocket journal, June 8, 1944, Hedge Maze. "We've learned the land's secrets, and it has taught us fear. Every tree, every hedge could be hiding death. Yet we push forward. Each life saved, each step gained, is a victory against the darkness. Tomorrow we march on St. Lo, and the war waits for no man." Sleep was fleeting, broken by distant artillery and the occasional scream. Thomas lay awake, thinking of his family, the letters from home, and the lives of his comrades lost or wounded. The battlefield had changed him. The boy who landed at Omaha Beach was gone, replaced by a soldier forged in fire. By morning, the men moved out again, stepping carefully through the labyrinthine fields. Thomas's senses were heightened. Every rustle of leaves, every distant echo of gunfire, set his heart racing. The journey to St. Lo would not be easy, but he had learned that courage, camaraderie, and vigilance were as vital as any weapon. As they disappeared into the misty fields, Thomas felt a strange mixture of dread and determination. The road ahead was fraught with danger, yet each step forward was a testament to human resilience. The war had thrown them into hell, but the fight for freedom demanded they endure. And endure they would, no matter the cost. June 9, 1944, brought a heavy mist over the rolling fields of Normandy. Thomas Sullivan's unit had fought through endless hedgerows, farms, and ambushes, but St. Lo still loomed ahead, a vital stronghold the Germans had fortified to slow the Allied advance. The town, though small, was a symbol. Capture it, and the road to central France would begin to open. Fail, and the war might stall in the hedgerow hell forever. As they approached, the first sign of trouble appeared. The distant roar of artillery and the black smoke rising from the outskirts of the town. German forces had anticipated the Allies' push and had set traps, laying mines along narrow roads and positioning machine guns in buildings. The landscape, once picturesque, had become a nightmare of twisted metal, crumbling walls, and smoldering fields. "Keep your heads down," Sergeant Hayes shouted. The unit moved cautiously, ducking behind ruined vehicles and shattered walls. Thomas's hands were trembling, his uniform caked with dirt, sweat, and blood. The young soldier's body ached from days of continuous fighting, but his mind stayed sharp. Survival demanded focus. Hesitation meant death. The first firefight erupted at the edge of town. German soldiers fired from the upper floors of half-collapsed houses. The Americans returned fire, taking cover wherever possible. Thomas squeezed the trigger of his M1 Garand, feeling the recoil jolt through his shoulders, each shot a desperate attempt to push back the tide of death. Around him, men fell, cries of pain mixing with the sharp staccato of gunfire. In the chaos, Thomas noticed a group of civilians trapped in a cellar. Smoke from nearby fires crept through the windows, and their frightened faces pressed against the cracks. He motioned to Jameson, and together they moved under fire to rescue them. Bullets ricocheted around them, but determination carried them forward. With the civilians safe, Thomas felt a surge of relief, tempered by the realization that countless others were not so fortunate. The battle intensified as they advanced deeper into the town. German resistance was fierce. Every street had been fortified, every building a potential death trap. Thomas and his comrades moved methodically, clearing rooms, throwing grenades, and suppressing enemy fire. The sounds of explosions and shouts created a nightmarish symphony, but the Americans pressed on, driven by duty, fear, and an unyielding will to survive. By mid-afternoon, Thomas found himself in the town square, a once beautiful plaza now scarred by craters and rubble. He took cover behind a broken fountain, scanning the area for threats. Across the square, German soldiers were retreating, regrouping for a counterattack. Thomas's unit pressed forward, pushing them back, street by street. Every step gained was costly. The ground was littered with the fallen, and Thomas could no longer distinguish the cries of friend from foe. Amid the fighting, he encountered a German soldier, trapped under a fallen beam. Their eyes met, and for a brief instant, the war seemed to pause. Thomas hesitated, then moved to lift the beam, freeing the young soldier. Before Thomas could react, Jameson shouted a warning. Another enemy sniper had taken aim. The German soldier bolted, vanishing into the chaos. Thomas's heart pounded. The line between mercy and danger was razor-thin. As evening fell, St. Lo was partially under Allied control, but the cost had been immense. The town was a smoldering ruin, its streets littered with debris and the fallen. The surviving soldiers set up a temporary perimeter, tending to the wounded and regrouping. Thomas found a moment to write in his journal, hands shaking from exhaustion. June 9, 1944, St. Lo. The town is ours, but the victory feels hollow. We have survived, yet countless lives have been lost. The streets we walk are haunted by the echoes of men and women who will never see another dawn. Yet, amidst the ruin, there is hope. Hope that our sacrifice will shape a future free from tyranny. Night brought uneasy rest. Explosions still punctuated the darkness, and distant gunfire reminded the soldiers that danger was never far. Thomas lay awake, thinking of home, of letters from his mother and sister, and the faces of comrades he would never see again. The war had changed him utterly. The boy who had landed at Omaha Beach was gone, replaced by a soldier hardened by fire, loss, and the constant struggle to survive. By dawn, on June 10th, the men prepared to push further. St. Lo was only a waypoint. The journey toward victory in Normandy continued. Thomas knew the next days would demand more courage, more endurance, and more sacrifice than he could imagine. Yet, despite the exhaustion and fear, he felt a steely determination. The fight was far from over, but he and his comrades would endure, one step at a time, driven by duty, honor, and the hope of a liberated France. June 10, 1944, dawned over the smoldering ruins of St. Lo. Thomas Sullivan and the remaining men of his unit were weary beyond measure. 3 days of relentless combat, beach landings, hedgerow ambushes, and street-to-street fighting had taken a toll that went far beyond the body. Every man carried the weight of loss in his eyes, and Thomas felt it in the ache of his bones and the tightness of his chest. Yet, despite the exhaustion, their mission pressed on, push beyond St. Lo, and secure the path for the Allied advance into Normandy. The town itself was a war-torn labyrinth. Buildings stood as skeletal remnants of their former selves. Streets were scarred with craters, and smoke lingered in the air, carrying the acrid smell of gunpowder and burning wood. Thomas moved cautiously, keeping low, weapon ready. His senses were honed from days of combat. Every sound could signal danger. Every shadow could conceal an enemy. Their orders were to advance toward a small ridge that commanded the surrounding area. Intelligence had reported heavy German resistance, including artillery positions that could decimate their ranks. Sergeant Hayes gathered the men for a final briefing. Stay sharp. Watch each other's backs. We move as one. We survive as one. The soldiers nodded, silently acknowledging the truth in his words. Unity had become their most precious asset. As they approached the ridge, a hail of bullets greeted them. German defenders had fortified the high ground, turning it into a death trap. Thomas dove behind a shattered wall as rounds tore through the air above him. Corporal Jameson crouched beside him, firing in short bursts to suppress enemy fire. The Americans moved like shadows, advancing inch by inch, using debris and ruined walls for cover. Each step forward was paid for in sweat, blood, and nerve. Amid the chaos, Thomas spotted a group of German soldiers attempting to flank them. With calculated precision, he fired at the nearest, forcing the others to take cover. Jameson provided covering fire, and together they turned the tide of the skirmish, allowing their unit to regroup and press forward. The ridge, though heavily defended, was within reach. Hours passed like minutes. The assault was brutal, with men falling on both sides. Thomas found himself in the middle of the ridge, bullets ricocheting around him. He heard a cry, a wounded comrade trapped under debris. Acting on instinct, he rushed forward, lifting the heavy rubble and dragging the man to safety. The small act of humanity felt monumental amidst the carnage. War demanded survival, but courage demanded more. By late afternoon, the ridge was finally secured. The German resistance had been broken, their forces retreating in disarray. The Americans held the high ground, and the path toward the heart of Normandy was opened. Thomas sank to the ground, exhaustion threatening to overtake him. Around him, the men tended to the wounded and accounted for the fallen. The price of victory was written in the blood of friends, foes, and innocents caught in the maelstrom. As the sun began to set, Thomas took a moment to look over the battlefield. The ridge commanded a view of the surrounding countryside, the same fields that had once seemed peaceful now scarred by war. He thought of the soldiers who had died beside him, of the civilians whose lives had been forever changed, and of the letters waiting at home. He pulled out his pocket journal, writing one final entry for this chapter of his life. June 10, 1944, The Ridge. We have survived, but at a cost I cannot measure. Friends are gone, lives destroyed, innocence lost. Yet in the ashes of destruction, I see courage, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. We fight not for glory, but for freedom. We fight so that one day letters from home are not tinged with fear, and children can dream of daisies instead of war. Night fell, bringing an uneasy calm. Thomas watched the stars, wondering if his family could see them too, hoping they would know he was alive. The war was far from over, but today a foothold had been established, a small victory in a vast, bloody conflict. The memories of Omaha Beach, the hedgerows, and the streets of St. Louis would remain forever, a testament to survival, sacrifice, and the enduring courage of ordinary men thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Thomas Sullivan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of history settle around him. The battles ahead would demand more, but he had learned that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the will to continue despite it. And so, under the quiet stars over Normandy, a young soldier rested briefly, ready to face whatever lay ahead, carrying with him the unyielding hope that freedom, though costly, was always worth the fight.